Sammy Gravano put 19 bodies on the table and walked out of federal prison in about 5 years. 19 murders, some of them his own friends, traded across a wooden table for a sentence shorter than the time most people spend paying off a car. That is the going rate. That is what a signature on a cooperation agreement is worth in an American courtroom, and every man in this life knows the number by heart. This is a story about 6 men who sat down at that same table, looked at that same pen, and left it lying there. A boss who ran an entire crime family from inside a bathrobe. A front who swallowed a 100-year sentence to protect a secret that was never even his own. A tyrant whose silence built the exact men who buried him. A soldier the movies told you was murdered, who was actually breathing free air on the day he refused to talk. A union boss convicted on the word of the one man in the room who did sign. And a boss they called Immortal, whose legend is the only one on this list that the record itself now argues about. 5 of them kept their mouths shut all the way into the ground. 4 of them died in the same kind of room. And not one of them ever picked up that pen. What that silence actually bought them is the whole story. It is stranger than loyalty, and in the end, it is a great deal sadder. Keep that pen in your mind. We are coming back to it. Start with the man in the bathrobe. For almost 30 years, the residents of Greenwich Village got used to the same figure shuffling along Sullivan Street. An old man in a stained terrycloth robe and slippers, unshaven, mumbling, sometimes stopping to relieve himself against a parked car in broad daylight. The neighbors knew him. The beat cops knew him. The newspapers gave him a nickname that stuck to him like a shadow: the Odd Father. And the story everyone repeated was that Vincent Gigante had simply lost his mind, and that the government was cruel and stupid enough to keep chasing a senile old man who could not remember his own address. That was the performance. Here is the man underneath it. On the night of May 2nd, 1957, a young, powerfully built ex-prizefighter walks into the lobby of the majestic apartment building at 115 Central Park West. He is calm. He's there to kill Frank Costello, the most powerful mafia boss in America. He raises a pistol, calls out so Costello turns toward him, and fires at his head. The bullet grazes Costello's scalp, and he lives. The shooter walks back out into the night. Costello knew exactly who shot him. He had every reason in the world to name him and end the threat forever. In court, under oath, Frank Costello looked at Vincent Gigante and said he had no idea who tried to kill him. The doorman had identified Gigante. It did not matter. Without the victim, the case collapsed, and in 1958, Gigante walked free. That is where the whole story of these 6 men really begins. Because the thing that saved Gigante that day was not a lawyer and not a lack of evidence. It was another man's silence. Omerta is not really a rule you follow. It is a debt you pay, and the interest on it is the rest of your life. Gigante learned the lesson better than anyone who ever lived it. He did a stretch for heroin trafficking in the 1950s, 7 years, and when he came out, he climbed. By 1981, he was the secret boss of the Genovese family, the largest and most disciplined organization in the American Mafia. And from almost the moment he took the throne, he began building the greatest disappearing act in the history of organized crime. He stopped signing his name to anything. He forbade his own men from saying his name out loud, so they tapped their chins instead, which is how he earned his other nickname, the Chin. He checked himself in and out of psychiatric hospitals. He hired a rotation of doctors who testified he suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and dementia. His own brother, a Catholic priest named Louis Gigante, swore the man was gravely ill. And the bathrobe, the mumbling, the wandering, all of it, was a costume he wore in public for the better part of 3 decades so that no prosecutor could ever put him in front of a jury. For years it worked. He was indicted in 1990 and ruled mentally unfit to stand trial again and again. But the government was patient, and the tapes told a different story than the bathrobe did. Prosecutors eventually played recordings of Gigante running the family in what the court described as a coherent, careful, and intelligent manner. In 1997, he was finally convicted of racketeering and conspiracy and sentenced to 12 years. And then, on April 7, 2003, the act ended in the strangest way possible. Vincent Gigante stood up in a federal courtroom and pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice. He admitted out loud on the record that the insanity had been a fraud the entire time. 30 years of shuffling and drooling and being led around by the hand, all of it a performance, and he confessed to it himself to shave a few years off a sentence he was going to die serving anyway. His son Andrew had already been dragged into the case for carrying his orders. 2 years later, on December 19, 2005, Gigante died at the federal medical prison in Springfield, Missouri, at the age of 77. He beat the government for almost 50 years with nothing but his own silence and a bathrobe, and it still ended with him dead behind a wall. But here is the detail almost everyone missed at the time. For most of the years, Gigante was pretending to be a lunatic on Sullivan Street. The man taking the fall for being the Genovese boss was somebody else entirely. A fat man in a fedora, 40 blocks north, sitting on a folding chair on the sidewalk in East Harlem. His name was Anthony Salerno, and everyone called him Fat Tony. For most of the 1980s, if you asked the FBI to name the single most powerful mobster in America, they pointed at Salerno. He held court outside the Palma Boys Social Club at 416 East 115th Street, a narrow little storefront where he sat in his fedora with a cigar clamped in his teeth, taking meetings and settling disputes. In 1986, a famous magazine feature ranked him as the #1 mafia leader in the country by power and influence. When the government brought its landmark case against the mafia's ruling commission, they charged Salerno as the boss of the Genovese family. He was convicted in November of 1986 and sentenced to 100 years in prison. There is a question buried in every single one of these stories, and it is the same question the men themselves had to answer. Imagine you are staring down the rest of your natural life inside a concrete box, and all you have to do to walk back out into the daylight, to see your kids again, to die in your own bed, is give the government one name. Just one. Do you keep your mouth shut and rot? Or do you pick up the pen and sign? Before you decide how brave you would be, watch what that silence actually bought the men who chose it. Tell me in the comments where you land, because there is a defensible answer on both sides. And if you're new here, subscribe. I build these from trial transcripts and federal records every week, and there is a new one every time. So the government had their all-powerful Genovese boss tried and convicted and sentenced to a century. Except they did not. In 1986, Salerno's own trusted driver and confidant, a man named Vincent Cafaro, flipped and sat down with the FBI. And Cafaro told them something that quietly rewired the entire map of the American Mafia. Anthony Salerno had never actually been the boss of the Genovese family. He was a decoy, a front, a deliberate piece of theater the family had been running since around 1969, putting the loud, visible, quotable fat man out front on the sidewalk so that everyone, the FBI included, would spend their energy watching him. The real boss, the whole time, was the quiet lunatic in the bathrobe downtown. Sit with what that means. Anthony Salerno absorbed a 100-year sentence and a second racketeering conviction that added 70 years on top of it, for a crown he did not even wear. The FBI had wired the Palma Boys Social Club with a bug back in June of 1983 and left it running for more than a year, and much of what convicted him was Salerno being Salerno, boasting on tape about his own importance. He played the boss so well that he went to prison as one. He died at that same federal medical center in Springfield, Missouri, in July of 1992, still keeping the secret. He never once corrected the record, never once told the government the truth that could have helped him, because the truth belonged to another man, and you do not give away another man's truth. Whatever you have read online about Salerno being worth $10 billion is invented. The magazine that ranked him never put a dollar figure on him at all. What he actually was loyal all the way down to the point of disappearing his own real story to protect somebody else's. If Salerno's silence protected another man, Nicodemo Scarfo's silence protected no one. It did not have to. He simply killed almost everyone who might ever talk. He just did not count on the ones he missed. They called him Little Nicky. He stood about 5'5", spoke in a high, thin voice, and ran the Philadelphia crime family through the 1980s as one of the most violent organizations the American underworld ever produced. He inherited the throne through blood. The old boss, Angelo Bruno, had run Philadelphia for 2 decades on a quiet, businesslike style, and Bruno was murdered in 1980. His successor, Philip Testa, the man they called the Chicken Man, was killed on March 15, 1981, when a bomb packed with nails detonated under his own front porch. Out of that chaos, Scarfo climbed to the top, and then he set about destroying the thing he had climbed. His organization is credited with roughly 30 murders across the 1980s, and Scarfo ordered them with a paranoid, jealous rage that eventually turned on his most loyal men. In 1984, he had Salvatore Testa killed. Salvi Testa was the son of the murdered Chicken Man, a rising star, and by every account one of the most devoted soldiers Scarfo had. Scarfo had him murdered anyway, reportedly out of pure jealousy of the younger man's popularity. That is the moment the machine turned. Because when a boss will kill his own most faithful man out of envy, every man beneath him does the math. And the math says talk first. Then Phil Leonetti flipped and took the whole ledger with him. Leonetti was not some peripheral associate. He was Scarfo's own nephew, and his underboss, one of the youngest underbosses in mafia history. When his own long sentence came down, Leonetti broke the oath and testified against his uncle. He was not alone. Nicholas Caramandi, a Scarfo soldier known as Nicky Crow, flipped and said plainly that he cooperated because he was certain Scarfo was going to have him killed. Thomas DelGiorno turned as well. The most brutal boss in Philadelphia became the most informed upon, and in 1988 a federal jury convicted Nicodemo Scarfo of ordering 9 murders and 4 attempted murders. He was sentenced to 55 years. When the number came down, he reportedly just shrugged. The violence had one more thing to cost him, and it reached his own blood. On Halloween night in 1989, his son, Nicky Jr., was eating in Dante and Luigi's restaurant in Philadelphia when a gunman in a Batman mask walked in and shot him. The younger Scarfo survived. His father built an empire on fear, and fear, it turns out, is the one thing that starts talking the second you are not in the room to hear it. Nicodemo Scarfo died in federal custody at Butner, North Carolina, in January of 2017, at the age of 87. The transcript of what really happened to the next man tells a very different story than the one you paid $10 to watch in a theater. You know this scene, even if you do not know his name. In the film Donnie Brasco, Al Pacino plays a weary, aging mob soldier named Lefty. Near the end, sensing the phone call that means his own death, he quietly empties his pockets, He takes off his watch and his rings and leaves them on the dresser for his wife, so the men who kill him will not steal them. Then he walks out the door to die. It is one of the most human deaths in any mob movie ever made. The real Lefty was a Bonanno soldier named Benjamin Ruggiero, and he did not die that day. He did not die anything like the way the film shows. Ruggiero was the man who, without ever knowing it, mentored an undercover FBI agent named Joseph Pistone for roughly 6 years, believing the whole time that he was bringing a jewel thief named Donnie Brasco into the life. When the operation finally ended, it detonated. It led to more than 100 federal convictions and shattered the Bonanno family for a generation. Ruggiero, a man credited by associates with a long list of killings, a man who kept fish tanks in his apartment and fussed over them, was not shot in a quiet room. On the night the operation closed in the summer of 1981, the FBI arrested him. In part, they arrested him to save his life because the family had already marked him for death for vouching for a federal agent. And then the government offered Benjamin Ruggiero the pen. They offered him protection, a new name, a new life, safety for his family in exchange for his testimony against the Bonannos. He was facing serious prison time, and he was not a young man. He said no. He cited the code, and he went to trial, and in November of 1982, he was convicted and sentenced to 15 years. The men around him paid a heavier price than he did for the same operation. Dominic Napolitano, the capo they called Sonny Black, had personally vouched for the fake Donnie Brasco. On August 17, 1981, he was murdered for it. Tony Mira, who first introduced Pistone into that world, was killed too. Ruggiero served his time in silence. He was released in 1993, already dying, and lung and testicular cancer killed him on November 24, 1994. The movie gave him a clean, tragic exit on his own terms. Reality gave him 13 more years, a prison cell, a cancer ward, and a death as a disgraced old man. He earned that ending by refusing the one thing that could have spared him. He kept the code, and the code kept nothing for him. And this is the part where it stopped being business and started being about a body that was never found. If you have seen The Irishman, you have met the next man, or at least a version of him. Anthony Provenzano, Tony Pro, a Genovese capo out of New Jersey who was also a powerful Teamsters union boss running Local 560. In the lore built up around Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance, Provenzano stands as one of the shadowy power brokers who helped orchestrate it. That is the received version. Tony Pro, the man who made things happen. The record shows something almost opposite. Anthony Provenzano is, above all, the man who got testified against. In 1961, a union rival of his named Anthony Castellito, a man they called Three Fingers, vanished. His body was never recovered. For years, the case sat cold. Then, a member of the hit team, a man named Salvatore Sinno, flipped and became the government's witness. On the strength of Sinno's testimony, Provenzano was convicted in 1978 of that murder and sentenced to life. Sinno signed the pen that Provenzano never would. A year later, a federal labor racketeering conviction added 20 more years. Tony Pro never regained his freedom. The Hoffa question, the one the movies love, has to be handled honestly, because the truth is that no one can prove it. Hoffa disappeared on July 30th, 1975, and Provenzano, who had feuded viciously with him in prison, was a prime suspect. But there is no body, no physical evidence, and no confession from Provenzano. The version pushed by the film, drawn from Frank Sheeran's late-life claims, is rejected by serious investigators. Researchers like Dan Moldea have argued for years that the likely trigger man was Provenzano's own enforcer, Salvatore Briguglio, that Provenzano selected the team, and that the authorization came from the Pennsylvania boss, Russell Bufalino. The honest answer about Tony Pro and Hoffa is that his exact role is disputed and probably unprovable. And any documentary that tells you otherwise is selling you certainty it does not have. What is not disputed is what happened to the man who might have talked. The government wanted to flip Salvatore Briguglio, the enforcer known as Sally Bugs. On March 21, 1978, before he could ever sit down with them, Briguglio was shot in the face on a street in Little Italy, outside the Andrea Doria Social Club. Provenzano died of a heart attack in a prison hospital in California in December of 1988, having never testified, and having made very sure that the men who might testify against him could not. Every man on this list so far kept the code, and it cost him his freedom, or his life, or both. The last man kept it too, for longer and more famously than any of them. What his silence cost him was the code itself. Carmine Persico was the boss of the Colombo family, and among mobsters he was something close to a legend. They called him Junior. They called him the Snake, a nickname he was said to hate. And in later years, because of how long he survived, some called him the Immortal. He became boss in 1973, and he held that title until the day he died in 2019, 46 years, and he held most of it from inside a prison cell. When the government brought the commission case, the one that convicted Salerno, Persico did something almost no boss would dare. He fired his lawyers and represented himself, cross-examining witnesses in his own racketeering trial. He was sentenced to 100 years, part of a stack of convictions that totaled around 139 years. He was the last surviving defendant of that historic case. On paper, he is the purest stand-up boss of the entire modern era, and his silence cost him a war. Persico refused to give up the crown from prison. He named his son Alphonse acting boss and tried to keep the family in the bloodline, and a rival faction under Victor Orena decided to take it. What followed, from 1991 to 1993, was the Third Colombo War. Roughly 12 people were murdered. Somewhere near 68 men were indicted and around 58 convicted, and about 10 of them turned into cooperating witnesses, including Persico's own consigliere, Carmine Sessa. The war spilled into the streets and killed people who had nothing to do with any of it. On December 9, 1991, an 18-year-old named Matteo Speranza, working a shift at a bagel shop, was murdered by Persico's own faction. That is what the old man's refusal to let go actually purchased. A pile of bodies, a shattered family, and a hometown full of new informants. But the real cost came after he was already gone, and it is the reason his name is on this list with a question mark that none of the others have. In August of 2021, a lawyer named David Schoen, who was representing Persico's old rival Victor Orena, filed a document in court. It was an FBI record dated November of 1971, and it referenced something called the Top Echelon Informant Program, and it listed several Colombo figures, and one of the names on it was Carmine Persico. The implication, splashed across the newspapers, was staggering. The Immortal, the man who represented himself and died on a 139-year sentence rather than deal, might have been an informant all along. Here is where the record has to be read carefully, the way this audience deserves. That claim rests on essentially one source, a lawyer working on behalf of Persico's enemy. The historian David Garrow, who examined the same document, read it the opposite way, concluding that Persico appears on it as a target of an informant, not as the informant himself, and that the actual top echelon source in question was very likely Gregory Scarpa Sr. Persico's own attorneys denied it flatly and completely, and no court ever ruled that it was true. Arena's motion was denied, and the appeal was rejected on procedural grounds without ever settling the question. Carmine Persico died at a hospital connected to the federal prison at Butner, North Carolina on March 7, 2019, at the age of 85, still serving that mountain of time, having never taken a deal that anyone can document. A man can guard a secret for 50 years and still lose control of it the day someone else gets to decide what it was. Persico kept his silence longer than any of them. He may not even get to keep the meaning of it. So look at the 6 of them together, and the pattern is unmistakable, and it is the opposite of the legend. Their silence was supposed to be a wall. It was supposed to protect the family, protect the men, hold the whole thing together. It did the reverse. Their silence, and the fear they used to enforce it, manufactured the exact informants who destroyed them. Salerno's loyalty could not stop Cafaro from talking. Scarfo's terror produced Leonetti and Caramandi. Persico's war handed the government Sessa. Provenzano was convicted by Sinno. The Great Bonanno collapse came out of an operation that ran for years right under their noses. Every single one of these men held the line himself, and every single one of them was buried by somebody standing right next to him who did not. And then there is that other thing. 4 of these 6 men died in the same handful of rooms. Anthony Salerno and Vincent Gigante both died at the Federal Medical Prison in Springfield, Missouri. Nicodemo Scarfo and Carmine Persico both died in the orbit of the Federal Medical Center at Butner, North Carolina. 4 bosses and soldiers, some of them enemies, some of them strangers, all of them proud, all of them silent, and the machine funneled them into the same government hospital beds to die under the same fluorescent lights. You do not buy your way out of that ending with silence. You only choose the company you arrive in. 6 men were offered the same pen. Not one of them signed it. And it did not matter in the slightest, because the government already had every signature it needed. Those signatures just belonged to the men who had been sitting right beside them the whole time. The pen was never really the offer. It was only ever a courtesy. For these 6, silence was not the thing that saved them, and it was not the thing that damned them. It was simply the last thing they owned, and they took it into the ground, right up until the record decided whether they even got to keep that.